When we think about disability and making spaces accessible, there are two different models that are used, and the old model of disability is known as the medical model. And this model says, basically, if you have a disability, there's something wrong with you. This is a dysfunction, and we'll try to fix something so that you can adapt to it. And often this involves retrofitting. So here's an example in this picture. Here's a building where the designer wanted a nice porch with steps. All right, that's the building. Then somebody said, oh, we better come back and retrofit it and make it accessible. All right, well, we'll put a ramp up there. So the ramp just looks stuck on. It looks it's not a nice integral design. It just looks like, all right, you people with your disabilities will accommodate you. That's the medical model. The social model says it's not that there's something wrong with you. This is a design problem. You can't access our space because of bad design. So that's basically a social construct, and we should just do a better job of designing. And part of the idea there is that we value all kinds of different people. The more difference we have, the richer our social culture is. So we don't want to block out people who use wheelchairs or Hoover canes just because they have a particular condition. We'll be a richer culture if we incorporate everyone. And the design response that you might do as you're designing a space involves collaboration with all kinds of people, asking the users, what do you need, what will work for you, and making this a space for all people. What we're looking at in the bottom of the slide is the entrance to the Herb Memorial Union, the EMU at the U of O. I'm going to show you that again in another slide. When we talk about disabilities, maybe we want to be careful about the language we use. So it's easy to slide into this pattern called identity first language, where we identify the person by their disability, not by who they are. So we call them the handicapped, the blind. Well, excuse me, but that person who is blind is actually an attorney and would prefer to be thought of as an attorney, not the blind. The person who uses a wheelchair is actually an architect and would prefer to be thought of as an architect, not the handicapped. So that identity first language kind of blocks us from thinking about the person as an actual person who deserves respect. So many people try to use what's called person first language, and you might hear me do this. I try to use the word person, a lawyer, an architect, a person, and then if I have to mention the disability, then I'll say who uses a wheelchair, who is blind. So I'm highlighting who the person is, not the fact that they have this particular disability. This series of pictures from Ottawa, Canada, illustrates the idea of equal, separate is not equal. So here are three people trying to watch a baseball game. And one of the people is what you are sometimes referred to as little people, people who are under 3 feet tall. They're being treated equally. They all have boxes, but the short person cannot see over the fence. So the designer comes along and says, here, I'll give you a box to stand on. There, now you can see over the fence. Well, that's great, but now you are being treated differently from everybody else. In the third picture, the designer has removed the fence and the boxes and put up a fence that everybody can see through. Now, maybe you like chain link fence and maybe you don't, but the point of this picture is that everyone can walk up to the fence without help. Nobody has to lift anybody up, and everyone can see through the fence, and nobody has to be pointed at as being different. And that's an idea called universal design. Universal design is the goal of allowing everyone to use the space or the object equally, no matter what their particular ability is. They don't have to identify themselves as having some special need. They don't have to identify themselves as needing help, and they're able to use this place independently without standing out as someone with a disability. This is the goal. Whatever your ability or disability, you can live your life independently without needing special doodads and asking for helpers. Here's an example of where this came into play. This is the Wayne Morse Federal Courthouse in Eugene, Oregon. This is what it looked like right after it was built, before the trees grew up so nicely. And the city of Eugene hired Tom Main, who's a star architect, known as a starchitect, a big famous architect. They wanted a landmark building. And Tom Main, the architect, thought about, what does it mean to be a courthouse? A courthouse has grand steps rising to a grand entrance. I shall design a building with these grand courthouse steps. So he did. And people in the disability community said, how are we going to get into the building? And the architect said, oh, that's all right. There's an accessible entry around back. Essentially, and he didn't say this exactly, but he was essentially saying, y'all can go around back and use the freight entrance. And actually, there are many buildings who do actually do that. So that was his approach. Y'all can go around back and essentially use the freight entrance. And to their credit, the local disability community said, no, that is not acceptable. We deserve to come in through the front door like everybody else. We insist that you demand an entrance that everyone can use. And so he actually did. He figured out a way to build an accessible ramp into these stairs, and now everyone can use the stairs or the ramp and come in the same place. It's a little bit clumsy and awkward. It's not what you call an elegant solution, but it is a solution. This idea, separate is not equal, was a basic civil rights principle that was first articulated in the Supreme Court decision Brown versus Board of Education in 1954. Separate is not equal. And so when we're doing universal design, we are looking for ways to let everyone use the same entrance and the same facility the same way. Universal design has become a standard discipline, and these are the 7 principles of universal design. These are some maybe more detailed guidelines about how to allow people to come in the door, use a faucet, use a can opener, look out the window, whatever, regardless of what their physical ability or disability is. So designers keep these principles in mind. I want to show you a couple of examples of universal design. This one is Jerry's Building Supply. This one happens to be the one on 99, Highway 99. And the designer designed the entrance to this building as a zero-step entrance. In the parking lot, there are accessible parking spaces next to the entrance. There are accessible pathways clearly marked next to the accessible parking spaces. There's a clear pathway from there to the front door. The front door has no step. It has electrically activated doors that slide, so when you walk or roll up to the door, it automatically opens. Everyone uses that entrance the same way. By the way, about parking, I forgot to mention something when we were talking about what language to use. Kind of a pet peeve of mine is the marking of accessible parking spaces. This relates to language. And this especially generated some discussions at LCC. We had an architect there who put up signs at the parking spaces that said handicapped, handicap parking. And some of us objected and said, why do you have to point at that? Why don't we say accessible? And it took a battle of several years to finally get the system changed over. I just want to say, if you ever see signs marking parking spaces, I hope that you will be aware that these spaces are accessible. That's a positive thing. We don't necessarily need to say handicapped. That's that pejorative term. Anyway, end of rant. The other example I want to show you that we mentioned before is this entrance to the EMU at the University of Oregon. So in the picture on the right, this is 13th Avenue going behind the plaza. In these two pictures on the left, 13th is out in front of the picture. And this was a problematic building with multiple levels and lots of stairs and difficult. And so Cameron McCarthy Gilbert, a local landscape architecture firm, redesigned the entrance with this circular pathway. And because a ramp steeper than 5% has to have handrails on both sides, Gilbert, who designed it, designed the slope at 4.9%. So it does not require handrails. And the idea was, well, if you use a wheelchair, you can use the ramp, and if you are walking, you can use the stairs. But people love these ramps, and nobody uses the stairs. Everybody uses the ramps. They become like a social space. They're really popular. You can see down here in the center of the circular area is a sort of a stage, so people roll or walk up on the ramp and stop and listen to music on the stage. It's just a wonderful solution and a wonderful example of universal design. Finally, this is just a matrix of accessibility features from Visitable Housing Canada that I stick in here so you can see. Here listed on the left are some strategies that you can use in your building, and then a check mark showing is it visitable, or at the maximum, is it universal design, which is our goal.